a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Jimmy Hoffa. James Riddle Hoffa was an American labor union leader who served as the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters Union from 1958 until 1971. He vanished in late July 1975, at age 62. From a young age, Hoffa was a union activist, and became an important regional figure with the IBT by his mid-20s. By 1952 he had risen to national vice president of the IBT, and served as the union's general president between 1958 and 1971. He secured the first national agreement for Teamsters rates in 1964 with the National Master Freight Agreement. He played a major role in the growth and development of the union, which eventually became the largest in the United States with over 2.3 million members at its peak. During his terms as its leader, Hoffa became involved with organized crime from the early years of his Teamsters work, and this connection continued until his disappearance in 1975. He was convicted of jury tampering, attempted bribery and fraud in 1964, in two separate trials. He was imprisoned in 1967 and sentenced to 13 years. In mid-1971, he resigned as president of the union as part of a pardon agreement with President Richard Nixon. He was released later that year, though barred from union activities until 1980. Hoffa, hoping to regain support and to return to IBT leadership, unsuccessfully attempted to overturn this order. Hoffa vanished in late July 1975 and was declared legally dead in 1982. Early life and family. Hoffa was born in Brazil, Indiana on February 14, 1913, to Indiana natives John and Viola Hoffa. His father, who was of Pennsylvania Dutch ancestry, died in 1920 when Hoffa was 7 years old. The family moved to Detroit in 1924, where Hoffa was raised, and lived the rest of his life. Hoffa left school at age 14 and began working full-time manual labor jobs to help support his family. Personal life. Hoffa married Josephine Pasiwak, an 18-year-old Detroit laundry worker of Polish heritage, at Bowling Green, Ohio on September 24, 1936. The couple had met during a non-unionized laundry workers' strike action 6 months earlier. The couple had 2 children, a daughter, Barbara Ann Kranzer, and a son, James P. Hoffa. The Hoffas paid $6,800 in 1939 for a modest home in northwest Detroit. The family later owned a simple summer lakefront cottage in Orion Township, Michigan, north of Detroit. Barbara retired as an associate circuit judge in St. Louis County, Missouri, in March 2008. 1 year later, she agreed to serve under Missouri Attorney General Chris Costa as chief counsel of the Division of Civil Disability and Workers' Rights. She retired from that post in March 2011. James has served as president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, his father's old position, since 1999. Early union activity. Hoffa began union organizational work at the grassroots level through his employment as a teenager with a grocery chain, a job which paid substandard wages and offered poor working conditions with minimal job security. The workers were displeased with this situation and tried to organize a union to better their lot. Although Hoffa was young, his bravery and approachability in this role impressed fellow workers, and he rose to a leadership position. By 1932, after defiantly refusing to work for an abusive shift foreman, who inspired Hoffa's long career of organizing workers, he left the grocery chain, in part because of his union activities. Hoffa was then invited to become an organizer with the local 299 of the Teamsters in Detroit. Growth of the Teamsters. The Teamsters Union, founded in 1903, had 75,000 members in 1933. As a result of Hoffa's work with other union leaders to consolidate local union trucker groups into regional sections, and then into a national body, work that Hoffa ultimately completed. Over a period of 2 decades, membership grew to 170,000 members by 1936. 3 years later, there were 420,000. The number grew steadily during World War II and through the post-war boom to top 1 million members by 1951. The Teamsters organized truck drivers and warehousemen, first throughout the Midwest, then nationwide. Hoffa played a major role in the union's skillful use of quickie strikes, secondary boycotts, and other means of leveraging union strength at one company, to then move to organize workers, and finally to win contract demands at other companies. This process, which took several years starting in the early 1930s, eventually brought the Teamsters to a position of being one of the most powerful unions in the United States. Trucking unions in that era were heavily influenced by, and in many cases controlled by, elements of organized crime. For Hoffa to unify and expand trucking unions, he had to make accommodations and arrangements with many gangsters, beginning in the Detroit area. Organized crime influence on the IBT would expand as the union itself grew. Hoffa's rise to power. Hoffa worked to defend the Teamsters unions from raids by other unions, including the CIO, and extended the Teamsters' influence in the Midwestern states, from the late 1930s to the late 1940s. Although he never actually worked as a truck driver, he became president of Local 299 in December 1946. He then rose to lead the combined group of Detroit area locals shortly afterwards, and advanced to become head of the Michigan Teamsters groups sometime later. During this time, Hoffa obtained a deferment from military service in World War II by successfully making a case for his union leadership skills being of more value to the nation, by keeping freight running smoothly to assist the war effort. At the 1952 IBT convention in Los Angeles, Hoffa was selected as national vice president by incoming President Dave Beck, successor to Daniel J. Tobin, who had been president since 1907. Hoffa had quelled an internal revolt against Tobin by securing Central States regional support for Beck at the convention. In exchange, Beck made Hoffa a vice president. The IBT moved its headquarters from Indianapolis to Washington, D.C., taking over a large office building in the capital in 1955. IBT staff was also enlarged during this period, with many lawyers hired to assist with contract negotiations. Following his 1952 election as vice president, Hoffa began spending more of his time away from Detroit, either in Washington or traveling around the country for his expanded responsibilities. Hoffa's personal lawyer was Bill Buffalino. Teamsters Union presidency. Hoffa took over the presidency of the Teamsters in 1957, at the convention in Miami Beach, Florida. His predecessor, Beck, had appeared before the John Little McClellan-led U.S. Senate Select Committee on Improper Activities in Labor or Management field in March 1957, and took the Fifth Amendment 140 times in response to questions. Beck was under indictment when the IBT convention took place, and was convicted and imprisoned in a trial for fraud held in Seattle. Teamsters Union expelled. The 1957 AFL-CIO convention, held in Atlantic City, New Jersey, voted by a ratio of nearly 5-1 to expel the IBT from the larger union group. President George Meany gave an emotional speech, advocating the removal of the IBT and stating that he could only agree to further affiliation of the Teamsters if they would dismiss Hoffa as their president. Meany demanded a response from Hoffa, who replied through the press, "We'll see." At the time, IBT was bringing in over $750,000 annually to the AFL-CIO. National Master Freight Agreement. Following his re-election as president in 1961, Hoffa worked to expand the union. In 1964, he succeeded in bringing virtually all over-the-road truck drivers in North America under a single National Master Freight Agreement, in what may have been his biggest achievement in a lifetime of union activity. Hoffa then tried to bring the airline workers and other transport employees into the union, with limited success. During this period, he was facing immense personal strain as he was under investigation, on trial, launching appeals of convictions, or imprisoned. For virtually all of the 1960s, Hoffa was re-elected, without opposition, to a third 5-year term as president of the IBT, despite having been convicted of jury tampering and mail fraud in court verdicts that were stayed pending review on appeal. Delegates in Miami Beach also elected Frank Fitzsimmons as first vice president, to become president, if Hoffa has to serve a jail term. Criminal charges. Hoffa had first faced major criminal investigations in 1957, as a result of the McClellan Senate hearings. He avoided conviction for several years. However, when John F. Kennedy was elected president in 1960, he appointed his younger brother Robert F. Kennedy as Attorney General. Robert Kennedy had been frustrated in earlier attempts to convict Hoffa, while working as counsel to the McClellan Subcommittee. As Attorney General from 1961, Kennedy pursued the strongest attack on organized crime that the country had ever seen, and he carried on with a so-called Get Hoffa squad of prosecutors and investigators. Prison sentences. In 1964, Hoffa was convicted in Chattanooga, Tennessee of attempted bribery of a grand juror, and was sentenced to 8 years. This case resulted from an earlier matter, the Test Fleet case, the trial for which had been held in Nashville. Hoffa was implicated by one of his close associates, Louisiana Teamster Edward Grady Partine, who went to the FBI with the information that led to Hoffa's conviction. Hoffa was also convicted of fraud later that same year for improper use of the Teamsters pension fund. In a trial held in Chicago, Hoffa had illegally arranged several large pension fund loans to leading organized crime figures. He received a 5-year sentence to run consecutively to his bribery sentence. Kennedy, who had pursued Hoffa for several years, stepped down as Attorney General after the second Hoffa conviction, and was elected to the U.S. Senate in the 1964 election. Hoffa spent the next 3 years unsuccessfully appealing his 1964 convictions. Appeals filed by his chief counsel, St. Louis defense attorney Morris Schenker, reached the U.S. Supreme Court. He began serving his sentences in March 1967 at the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. Appoints Fitzsimmons as caretaker president. Just before he entered prison, Hoffa appointed Frank Fitzsimmons as acting Teamsters president. Fitzsimmons was a Hoffa loyalist, fellow Detroit resident, and a longtime member of Teamsters Local 299, who owed his own high position in large part to Hoffa's influence. Despite this, Fitzsimmons soon distanced himself from Hoffa's influence and control after 1967, to Hoffa's displeasure. Fitzsimmons also decentralized power somewhat within the IBT's administration structure, foregoing much of the control Hoffa took advantage of as Union president. Post-prison. On December 23, 1971, less than 5 years into his 13-year sentence, Hoffa was released from prison. When President Richard Nixon commuted his sentence to time served. Following his release, Hoffa was awarded a Teamsters pension of $1.7 million, delivered in a one-time lump sum payment. This type of pension settlement had not occurred before with the Teamsters. The IBT endorsed President Nixon, a Republican, in his presidential re-election bid in 1972. In prior elections, the union had supported Democratic nominees, but had also endorsed Nixon in 1960. Suspicion was soon raised of a deal for Hoffa's release connected with the IBT's support of Nixon. It was alleged that a large sum of money, estimated to be as high as $1 million, was paid secretly to Nixon. Evidence was also alleged of a secret bribe paid in 1960. While glad to regain his freedom, Hoffa was very disappointed with the condition imposed on his release by President Nixon, which prevented Hoffa from engaging in union activities until March 1980. He accused senior Nixon administration figures, including Attorney General John N. Mitchell and White House Special Counsel Charles Colson, of depriving him of his rights by initiating this clause. Mitchell and Colson both denied this. It was likely imposed upon Hoffa as the result of requests from the Teamsters leadership, although Fitzsimmons also denied this. Hoffa sued to invalidate the non-participation restriction in order to reassert his power over the Teamsters. John Dean, former White House counsel to President Nixon, was among those called upon for depositions in 1974 court proceedings. Dean, who had become famous as a government witness in prosecutions arising from the Watergate scandal by mid-1973, had drafted the non-participation clause in 1971 at Nixon's request. Hoffa ultimately lost his court battle, since the court ruled that Nixon had acted within his powers by imposing the restriction, as it was based on Hoffa's misconduct while serving as a Teamsters official. Hoffa faced immense resistance to his re-establishment of power from many corners and had lost much of his earlier support, even in the Detroit area. As a result, he intended to begin his comeback at the local level with Local 299 in Detroit, where he retained some influence. In 1975, Hoffa was working on an autobiography titled Hoffa, The Real Story, which was published a few months after his disappearance. He had earlier published a book titled The Trials of Jimmy Hoffa. Brought to you by WikiVidi documentaries. Would you like to know more?